Welcome to our webinar, Equitable Evaluation and Excellent Expectation Setting, How to Create and Customize Your Turnitin Feedback Studio Rubrics. Your presenters for today are Chris Vescovi, and I'm Robert Trent. Let's talk about why you would use rubrics. Rubrics are a powerful tool that can help to align the focus and approach of multiple individuals at your institution, at your school, or at your district. They provide a common framework and can be developed cooperatively by faculty. The assessment is based on criteria rather than comparative norms. Now we'll look at how you can create new rubrics in Turnitin Feedback Studio. First, we'll talk about rubrics and grading forms. Grades can be entered by instructors using online grading, a rubric scoring card, grading form, or for peer review assignments in Turnitin Feedback Studio. There are three types of rubrics that you can create. The standard rubric allows you to enter scale values and criteria percentages. The maximum value for the standard rubric will be the same as the highest scale value entered. We also have a qualitative rubric that has no point values or weights. It allows you to create a rubric that has no numeric scoring. And then there's the custom rubric. This allows you to enter any value directly into the rubric cells. The maximum value for the custom rubric will be the sum of the highest value entered in each of the criteria rows. In Turnitin Feedback Studio for K-12 districts in North America, we have standards-aligned rubrics for multiple genres already loaded into the accounts. Here are some examples of the rubrics that are available. You'll see a list over on the right. This gives you an idea of what it looks like when you're using rubrics in Turnitin Feedback Studio. In our evaluation viewer, you can see the paper on the left and the rubric on the right. You can use the sliders to select how many points a student should have for each rubric criterion. Another view would expand the rubric out so you can see the full-size rubric. This is what it looks like when you access the rubric through the Rubric Manager when you're looking at the document viewer in Turnitin Feedback Studio. Creating a new rubric is easy. In Turnitin Feedback Studio, during assignment creation, under Optional Settings and Online Grading, there's a drop-down where I can select a rubric if I already have one, but if I don't, to the right where it says Launch Rubric Form Manager, I just click there to open up the Rubric Manager to create my new rubric. There's a menu in the upper left, and in that menu at the very top is an option to create a new rubric. This is the standard rubric form. It has point values in each column for scales and weights in each row for criteria. I'm going to jump right in and get started with creating my rubric. First, scales. Setting the point values. If I need to add columns or rows for scales or criteria, I just use the plus signs. So now I'll set up the criteria. And I'll add another row. And set my weights. Okay, so now that I've set my scales and criteria, I want to enter descriptions. And then I just click into the next cell to save the previous cell. Now I've gone through and I've entered the rest of my descriptions. I've edited as needed to make everything appear exactly as I want it to. Once I've created my new rubric, I want to save it. That way the rubric's going to be available to me for future assignments and future classes. To save it, I just scroll down and click Save at the bottom of the screen. Then the rubric will be available to me in the future. Keep in mind, there are 3 different scoring methods for a rubric. I just walked through how to create a rubric using the standard scoring method. Again, point values in each column for scales and weights in each row for criteria. At the bottom, there are other scoring methods I can select. The second option is the custom rubric that allows you to independently set the point values in each cell. And the third option is the qualitative rubric that has no point values or weights. For this one, I'll stick to the standard rubric and I'll save. There are ways that you can customize a rubric using Feedback Studio's rubric library. You would access this through the Libraries tab. Let's take a look now at how you would customize rubrics. To customize a rubric, you'll want to access a class in Turnitin Feedback Studio and go to the Libraries tab. After you click on the Libraries tab, you'll then go to where it says Rubric Form Manager. Then you'll have access to all of the rubrics in your account. Using the menu in the upper left, select the rubric that you'd like to customize. In order to customize a rubric, you have to make a copy. You cannot edit a pre-existing rubric if it's already been used to score an assignment. If I go to the menu in the upper left and scroll to the top, there's an option that says duplicate this rubric. If I duplicate a rubric, I can then edit the copy. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to duplicate this rubric, and now I can edit it. For example, this rubric is a qualitative rubric, but perhaps I'd like to edit it, customize it, so that it has point values and weights. So I'll go ahead and I'll do that now. I'll add point values. And then I'll add weights. Then if I need to, I can go in and I can edit the descriptions, I can edit the scales and or the criteria. So that's how I would customize a rubric. Now let's talk about how you can print a rubric. Turnitin Feedback Studio is optimized for the online experience. Other than doing a browser print screen or making the rubric again in a separate file, one way that you could print it is to download the current view when you access a paper that's already been graded. So I am in a class now in Feedback Studio under the Assignments tab. If I click on View under Actions, I'll see a list of submitted papers for this assignment. So here's a paper that's already been graded. I can click in by clicking on the similarity score or grade to take a look at the paper. Down in the lower right, there's a Download and Information Tools option, and if I click the Download tab, and I click Current View, it's going to give me a PDF that I can save or print. Now I'd like to show you that download. Here's the author and title and submission information and an image of the paper. If I keep scrolling past there, I can see where I've graded it, and then I can see the rubric. So here clearly I have criteria and descriptions all listed here in front of me. This PDF can be saved or printed, and that will give you the information from the rubric in one handy file.
Hi, this is Chris speaking now. What do well-defined and effective rubrics look like in Turnitin? I'd like to begin answering this question with some quick reminders of why rubrics are a great choice for student assessment to begin with. First of all, rubrics clarify criteria for excellence for students. When students understand what is expected of them and reflect on their own work with rubric expectations in mind, they develop metacognitive skills and feel ownership over their progress. Secondly, rubrics provide teachers a method for grading objectively, without bias or preconceived notions of previous work. Well-defined rubrics leave little to no opportunity for conflict because the criteria for content is laid out in detail across specific, achievable goals and benchmarks. Turnitin allows teachers to set up both analytic and holistic style rubrics for grading in the Feedback Studio. For today, we're going to focus on the traditional analytic version. What's on the screen now is a generic pre-Turnitin example of what an analytic rubric looks like. We've, of course, got our levels of performance, criteria, or the dimensions for what we're looking for in the paper, and the key to the rubric, the performance descriptors throughout the grid. Those performance descriptors are what's going to help students actually learn from these rubrics as opposed to just being scored on a paper. So when we take analytic style rubrics and build them in Turnitin, they'll end up looking something like this. To create this example, I actually took a built-in 11th to 12th grade argument paper rubric and just changed the scoring. So you've actually got access to this same rubric in your Turnitin environments and could use it today if you wanted to. We've got our criteria listed on the left side of the rubric, our levels of performance along the top here, and of course, our performance descriptors throughout the grid. In this rubric, I assigned percentage values to each of the criteria on the left and a point scale to the proficiency values up above. Based on the maximum point value for this Turnitin assignment, the rubric will automatically score the paper based on the numbers I've entered here. But again, a number alone does not offer students a way of strengthening a particular piece of writing, a strategy, or a technique. That's why these descriptors in the rubric are so important. Rubrics are more than a score because they help students by providing scaffolded improvement to reach for. You can even combine Turnitin rubrics with other feedback tools like quick marks and commenting to encourage the students to really look at these rubrics and learn from how they were scored. That'll motivate them more to go up a level on the rubric. As students continue improving their papers by going up a level here and there, it of course all equates to genuine improvement in their overall writing abilities. And that brings us to our next question. How may Feedback Studio rubrics be used as collaborative tools in conversations with your students? How do we bring students in on the significance of rubrics and help them utilize rubrics to take ownership of their writing development and feel pride in their work? Students unaccustomed to rubrics may be intimidated by them at first, but we want them to instead feel relieved. Rubrics exist to create a defined path for improvement and therefore success. The story doesn't just end with sometimes disappointing numbers. Here's a quote from a recent Turnitin blog post. It says, "Scores and grades only measure performance. They don't tell you how to get better." And this brings me back to the idea that Turnitin's rubrics can be combined with other Turnitin feedback tools to really tell the students how they can get better, how they can take ownership over their work and improve their writing. Feedback Studio allows you to tie custom comments to specific rubric criteria for each student submission. This is a very powerful tool in terms of encouraging students to revise effectively and develop their abilities. With your positive feedback in line with suggestions for improvement right on that rough draft itself, students have exactly what they need, where they need it to be in order to ascend to that next rubric proficiency tier. Your comments and contextualization for rubric criteria are what makes feedback actionable for students. Feedback Studio's QuickMark system even allows you to save your comments and categorize them for future use. Along with plenty of lists of pre-written, ready-to-post comments, you have the tools to leave more actionable feedback in shorter amounts of time. Time formerly spent typing or writing these comments across many papers is definitely saved when you're using Feedback Studio. For more details on QuickMarks, please check out Turnitin's QuickMarks focused webinar if you haven't already. Let's take the idea of rubrics for genuine student writing development one step further. Turnitin supports what are called PeerMark assignments. These are electronic peer review assignments in which students are tasked with leaving actionable feedback for each other. This effectively puts them in their instructor's shoes for a bit. It gives students an opportunity to be positive yet critical of their peers' work, and they may do so using a rubric from a new perspective. In PeerMark assignments, teachers can even set up free response and scale-based questions for their students to answer as they are leaving their peer review. The whole PeerMark process provides peer reviewers with valuable insight into the significance of rubrics and their own writing decisions and style. This is insight that they would not have picked up on from experiencing only the student perspective of the rubric. Through the rubric and the teacher-provided questions, students develop a better understanding of what their instructor is looking for in their own work and how they may improve their own work. A popular class exercise that can be applied to Turnitin's PeerMark tool is allowing students to develop their own assignment rubrics as a class. These methods increase students' ownership of their work, which leads them to take more pride in it. We want students to feel that their efforts aren't just for satisfying a teacher's task or just for the sake of receiving a grade and then moving on. On the screen now is the student perspective of a Turnitin assignment, on which we can see the student has access to the original assignment's rubric on the left, as well as the ability to launch their student's work on the right to leave their reviews on it. Now that we've taken a look at a couple of ways to get students thinking more about rubrics and their potential for true writing development, let's do the same for other instructors. How may Feedback Studio rubrics be used as collaborative tools in conversations with your colleagues? Rubrics can help to calibrate grading across departments, schools, and districts. A rubric can be used to create shared definitions of proficiency. When faculty all use a rubric in the same way, it makes the student evaluation process more consistent and efficient. It also promotes horizontal and vertical alignment across these departments and districts. On the screen now, we can see a snippet of a rubric created in Turnitin's Rubric Manager. On the right side of the Rubric Manager, there is a Share button. That blue Share button up here expands to allow you to import and export your rubrics. So one teacher could prepare a rubric and export it for an entire department to use. Alternatively, Turnitin.com administrators have the ability to share rubrics to an entire account. That account may be the school, it may be the district. Either way, if a rubric is provided to an administrator, they click this Share to Account button, and then they can make that rubric available in everyone's list across the account. Utilizing the same or similar rubrics across departments or schools, or even just you and another colleague, will allow you to better pivot from data collectors to data users. A great way of making this pivot within Turnitin is to combine the rubric feature with the online grading report feature of your Turnitin assignments. Online grading reports are used to highlight classes' strengths and weaknesses. Should you and colleagues use the same or similar rubrics, you may all export your data from your class assignments and compile it for insight into the strengths and weaknesses across the school or across the classes. With that data on hand, it becomes easier to design lesson plans and benchmarks and future rubrics with identified areas for improvement in mind. When a Turnitin assignment is created, an online grading report is associated with it. On the screen now, I'm sharing two different views of the same online grading report for an assignment. On the top, we have our numerical scores, and on the bottom, the qualitative scores. Both are derived from the rubric that I've associated to this assignment. In my example, I'm working with a rubric that allowed up to 2 points to be scored for each rubric category. In the numerical score view, I can see each of my students' score across the rubric in every category. I also get this average line on top, where I can see that the lowest score for this example was the support and evidence category of my rubric across the class. So I know that when we get into revisions for this assignment, I need to focus my students on better supporting their argument. The bottom view instead shows a more holistic version of an at-a-glance view of what's going on with students. We can see who is proficient and who is developing in each of those rubric categories right at a glance. But we also get the average numerical score on top in that view. Notice these reports may be exported. You're given a spreadsheet download that can be combined with other teachers' spreadsheet downloads. And when you compile all of this information together, you get a really great look at where the strengths and weaknesses lie across everyone's students. And again, that's going to help focus future revisions and lesson planning across the department or the school.
So does anybody have any questions for us?
So we had a question from Linda. It says, I'm not sure how you would introduce and teach students how to use the rubric. Ideas. So part of what I mentioned during the presentation was this idea of giving students ownership over their work. So a great introduction to rubrics for students is to show them an example of maybe a rubric you've used in the past, or just a simple generic rubric like I had on the screen earlier, and teach them the formatting of the rubric along with the significance of the rubric at the same time, so that they can design their own. So have the students run an assignment where they control the rubric. Have them vote on descriptions throughout the rubric. So you're of course guiding them, because we need that idea of proficiency to be front and center. So that once the students understand the levels that need to be outlined in this rubric, and they have some input into the criteria for each of these levels, they hold themselves accountable for what this rubric is going to look like. So you can run a practice assignment on which the point of the whole thing is to get that rubric creation and significance understood by the students. But so it's not really the end assignment that really matters for this. It's rubric building and the significance of that rubric. So once that rubric is built, you may or may not decide to follow through with an actual real assignment. But yeah, that would be my advice, is how to introduce and teach students to the rubric. So scaffolding, show them an example, and let them create a rubric so they understand what it's for. Because of course, if you're a student seeing a rubric for the first time, if you're not accustomed to them, it looks like a lot of text and it can be very intimidating. So the more they know about it and understand that it's there to help them improve as a learning tool, the more they'll be comfortable with it, and they'll mean more to the students. Okay, we had another question. Can you access student work and the rubric from a prior year to use as a download? I'm thinking it as exemplars for students with permission for students to see their work, of course. So you can always access the rubrics that you've associated to your assignments. If you're having students actually build rubrics on a document, a Word document or a Google document, if they're building out a rubric table and it's saved, if it's run by the system and submitted through Turnitin, it will remain accessible for you from prior years. But that's two different things. So there's students submitting a rubric that they've created in a table, as opposed to you actually setting up a rubric in the rubric manager, as Robert showed earlier. So just keep that in mind. But either way, the rubrics that are in the system, whether they are actually attached to an assignment or they're just created as documents submitted by students, are available in past courses. Yes, you can always grab old materials. Okay, and with that, we'll just leave you with a few links here that you can always visit for some documentation and additional resources. All right, everybody. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great remainder of your day and a fantastic remainder of your week.